1 week with the 16-inch M2 MacBook Pro has proven to be an interesting experience. From discovering the limits of the new M2 chip to discovering the ability to be able to run a fair amount of Windows app with Apple's latest development kit, Apple makes no joke of an impressive unboxing, with the dramatic pull away always being on point. Along with the typical overkill Apple design and engineering, you also get over-the-top performance, getting arguably one of the most well-built laptops on the market. In addition to getting perfect Apple build quality, which is one of the first qualities you notice, nothing beats the standard of quality Apple pushes with their products. Not only do they make some of the most well-built machines now, with new ports and amped up performance, spending maybe $3,000 plus for a Pro machine with no ports doesn't seem outlandish anymore. You can't find better calibrated displays than Apple's, and for the price, it's not half bad. Apple is top of the line whenever it comes to displays, and if you're looking for the best, Apple's a very safe baseline. From downloading Chrome to the first Photos import, I could instantly feel the new power. The first time I tried M1, I knew Intel and AMD were in for quite the dogfight. Now, almost 3 years later, not only has Apple begun to surpass the graphic power of even Nvidia, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And if I'm being completely honest, the M2 Pro does still leave a decent amount to be desired. As we all know, Apple has a very minimalistic approach to everything, including accessories, and for $2,500, you should expect nothing less. Getting only a MagSafe connector and some Apple stickers may seem outlandish to some consumers, and others will gleam at the fact that you get an all-new MagSafe connector. Despite me being so young, I actually did have an old MagSafe MacBook, and it definitely wasn't the reason that I got it. It's something that I do remember thinking about and being infatuated by the idea of magnetic power, which is the name that I gave it, not knowing that MagSafe was the coined term. Of course, MacBook buyers won't be in the game for accessories unless they're looking to pay a few $100s for even the most basic things, like maybe a larger power bank, not even made by Apple, but rather just given the TIM seal of approval. Using the M1 MacBook Pro, the generation that pretty much started the Apple silicone craze, has been an experience. But using the M2 Pro MacBook Pro, weird name, I don't think I've entirely explored the possibilities of this chip, but I still think that this is a good video to give you a summary of what you can expect from the M2 Pro. As much as I wanted to put the M2 Max to the test, I couldn't justify the $3,500 plus with M3 being around the corner, possibly coming to a much smaller process, which at first likely won't make a huge difference, but the second generation and maybe even the third could potentially be so much better that it'll leave these machines looking like paperweights rather than true powerhouse machines. Still, the rumor mill is churning out, and we may not even see a 3nm chip until an M4, which will make the M2 Max look like a better option. But even then, there's going to be a price cut. Unless you're planning on doing the most outlandish possible things with your machine, and you need the ability to do the craziest workloads wherever you go, then you don't need the M2 Max. In fact, the M2 Pro is the perfect machine. I personally haven't used the M2 Max, and using this machine as a reference, I can confidently say that the M2 Max will be more than enough for whatever workload you happen to throw at it. Of course, your workload will determine the machine that you ultimately get. I think the M2 Pro sits in an additional spot where it's not quite the 1,000 additional Apple dollars that they want, but it's also not half the speed of the M2 Max. The M2 Max isn't a super big jump in performance, and the 3nm process might not be a huge jump in performance. We should see big changes over time. Again, if you need the power, then you know what you need to do. However, if you don't mind buying a placeholder machine or otherwise not being on the cusp, M2 Pro is a great option. If you're buying a 16-inch MacBook Pro, you're likely looking for a desktop replacement and want a system that you can use for years and years on end and rely on comfortably. You shouldn't buy a MacBook Pro unless you're looking for the ultimate powerhouse machine. Of course, not all MacBook Pros are created equally, and your needs may have you feeling like the M2 Pro might not be enough, and the M2 Max is the better option. And I want to say that for the extra $1,000, the M2 Max is just not that much better. Now again, around January, we should see new chips. Hopefully. My last week with the M2 Pro has been quite the journey. Waiting a few months before buying a new release, in my opinion, is always the better bet, as with some new products you may find yourself as an early adopter guinea pig. These are some of the thoughts that I'm keeping in mind for Apple's newly announced Vision Pros. I guess anything can be Pro, but the new MacBooks Apple has spent years engineering, and if you're looking to get a MacBook, you should know that this is not some guinea pig product. But let's take a second to remember M1 at release versus M2 at release. Not only was there a much larger catalog of Apple silicone apps, but there was also tons of programming work to translate Apple silicone much faster. And with us losing Boot Camp, something like Crossover or other things that are adopting these translation processes could be crucial to your workload. Now, this is not a total breakdown of the MacBook, rather it's just kind of a final review of how it's been over the last week. I'm going to post my final thoughts of this MacBook in a separate video in about a week or so. But performance on this thing is blazing fast. There's not a single app this machine didn't surprise me in. Relatively crushing modded Minecraft to being able to play GTA 5 at decent FPS and running Fallout 3 modded, of course, at a decent frame rate. Now, this is still not a gaming machine. You can of course get all the wonderful professional apps to work amazingly, and I can personally say that this laptop handles 4K footage like butter. You can edit in full res, with all the Chrome tabs your heart could possibly desire. Now, I want to save outright benchmarks for my follow-up video, as I have some plans to try and get Apple Apple's new toolkit working on my machine, and if all else fails, a program that does do the translations, maybe, will be out. But overall, this Mac seriously is amazing, and for $2,500, it's a great base model Mac. We could be seeing a new process next year, and if we don't, then we should see price cuts, and then 3 nanometers after that. So my recommendation in conclusion, no conclusion, but I think skipping the M2 Max is your best bet, as even an M2 Ultra could find its way into MacBooks by next year. It'll make M2 Max feel more like a M2 Pro machine anyways. Apple is likely going to move to a 3 nanometer process, and even if they don't, we'll still see some improvements in the MacBook for sure. So save the 1K and perhaps get a 1TB M2 Pro, because don't forget, Apple did decide to pull a fast one on base model MacBook buyers by only using 1 NAND memory chip inside of the base 512GB model, which can cut storage speeds in half in some cases. It's not terrible, and you likely won't ever notice it, but it's still something to consider. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked, well, go ahead and put a sub, and if you didn't like, well, you can leave a dislike and tell me what you didn't like about it in the comments. If you did like, leave a like, and like I said, sub, and tell me what you liked about it. Do you think that we're going to get a 3 nanometer process next year? And if you do, well, leave that in the comments as well. And if you don't, tell me why you don't think that we will. Thank you guys so much, and goodbye. And make sure you keep your eyes open for my follow-up video. It should be out in like a week or 2 weeks.